And now, you're tuned in to RBLR, the home of Tampa Bay's Reveler Sports.
Hello, everyone out there in Tampa Bay and beyond. This is James Knowles coming at you for the RBLR Sports podcast. I am here, as always, with my usual co-host, Carlos. Carlos, how are you doing this evening on our video stream?
James, I'm doing quite well. I love looking at myself on screen. I'm looking as great as ever. You're looking great too. I love your polo, by the way. Very, very clean. I'm doing well here up in DC. It's still a little too chilly for my liking, but obviously, still keeping up with all the Rowdies news and whatever's going on down there. As you know, and I'm sure as all the fans tuning into this know, it's pretty slow time of year when it comes to new news and new headlines and stuff. But I will say this past weekend I was back home for my mom's 50th birthday.
Nice.
Passed by the Waters complex and took in some of the training just from the outside, from the fence. Started a little fence gang action over there on the Waters Avenue complex. And the team's looking really, I'm saying this just from having watched a couple practices, right, from outside the fence and Waters, but the team looks really good. Everybody looks like they're doing well. Even Ariel Martinez looked like he was in a really good shape.
Nice.
And he was one of the people I was a little concerned about, just given his career experience and his age and whatnot. But he looked like he was doing really well. Had a couple of really good finishes, and yeah, it's just a really, really exciting time of year because we can look ahead to what's going to happen this season, take our predictions and whatnot. But I am excited for this episode, James. And before we talk about any of that, I'm excited to take a look back and see what we have to talk about from one special season just over a decade ago. But before we do that, James, obviously, I want to ask you, how are you doing? What's going on down there?
Yeah, I'm okay. I think the fact that it was over a decade ago is it wasn't news to me because I knew obviously that we were doing this, but it still kind of hits you when you hear that again. You're like, oh my God, I cannot believe that much time has passed. I graduated from college in 2013, so I will have had 10 years in between me in May. So when we're talking about 2012, I guess it's even longer than that, despite it not feeling that way. So Carlos, we have an interesting thing to talk about here, and we're going to avoid the fact that it is over a decade ago. We're going to leave that part out of the general narrative this evening.
We can do that.
Tonight we are going to do what we did last year during the off season and go into a history series and talk about something, like you said, that happened in the past. One very good season. We did a season last year about the old NASL and the old Rowdies, and we had a couple of interviews related to that. So this year, what we're going to do instead is come back to the modern era and talk about when the Rowdies got the second star on their logo in 2012. They won the North American Soccer League, obviously the new version of the North American Soccer League, as opposed to the one where we got it back in the 70s and the 80s. So we will have to, go through the season, what it looked like, how the Rowdies were doing. And then next week, we have a very interesting interview. I don't want to give it away yet. We will talk about that at the end of this episode. But Carlos, I think that anyone who sees who we have lined up is going to be pretty excited. It is very cool. And I'm honestly very excited to be able to talk to him.
Yep. I think we can just say it's a very topical interview, given what we'll be talking about on this episode, James.
Exactly. That is exactly right. So before we get started, please follow RBLR Sports on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at RBLR Sports. And of course, please like and subscribe to our podcast on all major podcast platforms. Now, Carlos, let's get into it. So the way that we did this last year, Leo and I were talking about the old NASL and the old Rowdies, and effectively we just stopped whenever there was something to talk about. I know that you and I already had a couple of things that we mentioned we want to talk about, so let's just dive in, and we will start with the first segment here, which is on the Rowdies roster from 2012 and the season's format. So in 2012, that was the third year of the new Rowdies organization. So obviously there was a break in between from the years that we played through the 70s and the 90s until coming back until 2010. From that 2010 rebirth, however, we were known as FC Tampa Bay, and we were not able to call ourselves the Rowdies until ownership bought the rights to the Rowdies name from the old holder of those rights, and we were able to represent the Rowdies again for the first time in 2012. So I thought that was actually just an interesting little piece of history that we, for 2 seasons, were not the Rowdies, but we still had green and gold.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, there was still, a lot of similar patterning and everything like that. But
the stripes and
just
everything.
just imagine that there's a team in Tampa Bay playing soccer and they're not the Rowdies. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, it seems like this early period of the new Rowdies is a really weird time as a whole. I will say this is before my time coming into the Rowdies fandom, so it's really, really interesting to take a look back at it and kind of just read up on it and see kind of what I missed. Obviously, this was just after we had that inaugural season at Steinbrenner Field over
That's
by
right.
Raymond James Stadium. I think I'm not a big baseball guy. I think that's where the Yankees have their spring training, right?
As far as I'm aware, but
I'm
feel like we got to ask RBLR Rays
Yeah.
if they have a little bit more information.
Yeah. So I mean, that's one of those cases where there's very actively, like, I'm so anti, sharing a stadium with a baseball team. I think it's a terrible look for the league and soccer in the U.S. as a whole. And it happens way too much in the USL currently.
And MLS.
Yeah, and MLS, right? So it's just a really weird time looking back at it. We had that very strange logo where, if I'm recalling right, it's kind of like weird diamond with a few stripes, and it says FC Tampa Bay. Very Rowdies-esque, but not really Rowdies. I mean, really, really weird time to be, I guess, a Rowdies fan. I can imagine that must have been a very strange atmosphere if you're, one of the original Rowdies friends from back in the 70s. A time where you're not really sure if this is the same team. You're not really sure if they are going to share the same identity. I'm curious. It seems like a story to one day dive back into and see, I guess, maybe what the holdup was there. And even, frankly, I'm not even totally aware who that old ownership group was. So that'd be something interesting to take a look back on one day and maybe dive into that.
Well, we will talk a little bit about the ownership group of the Rowdies. I don't remember the name of the people who had the rights to the Rowdies name itself and the logo and everything, but that was also online, so possibly we could get a little bit more information there and ultimately put that out. That is a good topic to bring up again, Carlos. But I went to. I know that I've said this before 2020, when I wanted to start going to Rowdies games all the time. I was a very, very irregular fan, and I would go to a couple of games per season at most. But I do know I went to at least one game at George Steinbrenner Field, because I remember how weird it was to see them playing there. And I also remember mentioning to the people that I was with that I would like to see us take on the Rowdies name again. But of course, we couldn't at the time, and we would get there eventually. But yeah, it's just all very weird to think about.
Yeah.
This was our second year, actually, in 2012, I should say, playing at our current home of Al Lang Stadium. Previously, of course, we were at George Steinbrenner, like we've been talking about. And after coming in third in 2011, the Rowdies lost in the first round versus Minnesota in the playoffs that season. So obviously we were one and done there. Now, to compete in 2012, the roster was pretty much revamped. There were some notable returnees, and there will be some names that I think people will be relatively familiar with here, even if you're not, totally familiar with the roster front to back. I don't think that anybody, other than maybe the players themselves, will be as familiar as that. But let's go through that now, Carlos, and you let me know if any of these names stand out for you as either big names in Rowdies history, or maybe they're just big. Maybe they're big names outside of the Rowdies organization. In fact. But there were 2 goalkeepers listed on the roster, and those were backup Andrew Fontaine and Jeff Attinella. Now, I'm wondering I was wondering if there might be any bells or alarms going off there.
I mean, I feel like everybody knows Jeff Attinella, James. Even, I don't know. I know 2012, not to mention the time frame again, but it does seem like a little bit ago at this point. And obviously the Rowdies fan base has grown immensely, and its presence in the Bay Area has grown immensely since then. But even if you're a newer fan, I feel like, fans have mentioned this name so much since then that you have to at least have heard of the name, right? And he's even like a relatively, I don't know, like mid-level like sports influencer in the area still currently. He's very active on Twitter.
Yep.
He's always, in conversations with local sports media. He's always on the radio every once in a while. Every time I check Twitter, I see something about him on there. So I feel like you have to have at least heard of this name. If you haven't, please familiarize yourself with Jeff Attinella, because he is, as far as the Tampa Bay Rowdies go, I would say probably one of our earliest and greatest legends of this, I guess, new era of the team.
Yeah, he contributed in large part to us being able to actually get that second star, which we will talk about later on. But yeah, let's keep going forward with this roster here. Now, our defenders were they included former RBLR interviewee Andre Sarongo, a Canadian player who I have interviewed about his time coaching and playing for the Rowdies in the area. Great guy, by the way. I do want to say that. But yeah, Andre Sarongo was on the roster, as well as Daniel Scott, local boy JP Rodriguez, Frank Sanfilippo, Draymond Washington, another local boy Eddie Ababio, and Thurston Johnson, who I don't think got too many appearances for the Rowdies, if any, over the course of his time. But did any of those names stand out for you, Carlos, while I was going through them?
Oh yeah, I think one of the first names, just out of name recognition, that comes out to me is Frankie Sanfilippo. He was on the back end of his time with us, and on the back end of his playing career, kind of when I first really started throwing myself into this world of the Tampa Bay Rowdies. So I got to know his play style, his career a little bit when I was first around the team, 2015-ish. But again, that was on the back end of his career. But obviously, Andres Arango is somebody who is still around the club, still around the area, very active on Twitter.
Yep.
I believe he's been doing a lot of youth coaching in the area. Or, you would know better than him. You recently had a chat with him. Am I mistaken on that?
No, you are dead on. That is what he's mostly been doing, and contributing to having some good youth players for the Rowdies to choose from. Ultimately, from not just specifically St. Pete, around where the Rowdies play, or in Tampa where the Rowdies train, but also in the general area around.
Yeah. Yeah, he seems. If I'm not mistaken, I feel like I always see like the name Chargers around his Twitter account. That might be the name of the youth team he's been associated with. But yeah, Andres Arango, another player that I feel like a lot of Rowdies fans know, even if you weren't around for this time frame, this time period, this really awesome season, and the early period of our club. But yeah, Andres Arango, definitely the other name that rings a huge bell on the back line. As far as the other guys go, James, honestly, full transparency, these are guys that I only know about just from like occasionally checking the Wikipedia and watching the reruns and the YouTube highlights of this game over and over again. But yeah, Andres Arango and Sanfilippo are the ones that really stick out to me on the back line.
Yeah, I'm going to, I guess, date myself a little bit more and also be like, peaked in high school kind of guy here. But I actually went to Gaither High School in the Tampa area, if anybody knows where that is. But Eddie Ababio was at Gaither when I was there, and he was one of the best players by far on that team. When I went there as a freshman, I think he was getting into either his sophomore or junior year, would have been. Either way, he was good enough that he was getting called up to the U17 national program at IMG, which back then was a residency program. So he did not play on the Gaither High School soccer team the year that I actually started playing, which would have actually been my sophomore year anyway, because I got shin splints during the during the tryouts. And instead of sticking around, I was like, well, I got to catch the bus. I guess I won't do it today. But whatever you could tell your younger self, that would be one thing. Either way,
Nice.
Eddie Ababio was at Gaither, and ultimately ended up going to IMG because he was so good that he was going to be a U17 program, U17 national team player, and then went on to UNC to play for one of the best college soccer teams. So that was my little connection with the defenders, at least, other than Andre Sarongo that I've interviewed here.
Awesome.
Yeah, he was definitely very good. The midfielders for this roster included our future manager, Stuart Campbell, son of the coach at the time, Shane Hill. Daniel O'Brien was on the team, as well as Rowdies legend Keith Savage, Raphael Cox, another name that I think people might recognize, Luke Mulholland, Evans Frimpong, and finally, player who has made well over 100 appearances for the Rowdies, Takuya Yamada. Now, Carlos, I know that anyone who has been to the stadium is going to be quite familiar with at least two of those names because they are people who have made well over 100 appearances for the Rowdies in the modern era. Those two being Keith Savage and Takuya Yamada. But, I wonder if you have any specific stories about them or anybody else that we talked about in this midfield section.
Yeah, before I do that, quick shout out to my roommate, Thomas, who just came in. He's slowly becoming a Rowdies fan, but
there we go.
He's going to have a team of his own to root for soon because he's from up in Fall River, Massachusetts area.
Oh.
And there's a team up there in Rhode Island, Fall River area. That'll be coming to the USL soon. So it'll be a fun away day next year when they first start up their season. We already have it written down. We're going to try and get out there for Rowdies at, I forgot what the team name is, but you know what team I'm talking about, James. They have an expansion team in that area. I want to say, I'm not even going to guess because I'm going to be totally wrong. But that being said, midfielders, I mean, there's a couple names already that everybody should be familiar with. And again, if you're not familiar with some of these names, definitely familiarize yourself. Just huge parts of the Rowdies, like Cannon, Rowdies War. The modern era of this team is, it's made up by some of these guys practically. Like they kind of started, there's some of the original Rowdies legends, along with Jeff Atnella and whatnot. Obviously, you have, your future manager, Stuart Campbell, who coached for 4 seasons, maybe. He was the manager right before Neil Collins and kind of, it made the move that Neil Collins made from player to coach.
Yep.
Not totally unprecedented because Stuart Campbell kind of paved the way for that, moving from player to assistant coach to coach right after Rongan. So obviously a great player in his own right. But Keith Savage is another player who's just been around forever. He had well over 100 appearances, joined that elite club of 100 appearances for this modern era Rowdies. And he has his own little plaque at the stadium. If you walk in, you see kind of like our little Hall of Fame we have set up there. Really fun to have him there. Just a fantastic player in his own right as well. I was really excited when I got to see him play briefly. He had this, moment where he was coming back from injury and was playing for the Rowdies U23 side that at the time was playing in the PDL, if I'm not mistaken. And they were playing at the Waters complex. And that was a really cool time because I would go over to where they're practicing now, pick up some Wawa, sit down there with my dad and watch, what I thought could have been some potential, future Rowdies in their own right. And then Keith Savage was playing with these guys who are just so much younger than him. But it was just really cool to see like a legend of the game playing in this really small field in front of me with 50 other fans in attendance for that U23 side. So that was a really cool experience for me. Chatting with him. Keith Savage is just a fantastic character too. He's just a really good guy. If I'm not mistaken, his last formal involvement with the team, he was the youth team manager last season when they had some of those exhibition games and whatnot. He was involved with that, so he's still around. If there's one thing you'll notice, James, and I'm sure you've noticed this, so many players who aren't necessarily from the area will come down here, set up their career, and then just stay here for, the rest of their lives. And Keith Savage is one of those guys who's just stayed around the team too. So that's really good to see. And then obviously, the two, I'd say, biggest legends in this midfield unit were Luke Mulholland and Takuya Yamada.
Oh, yeah.
Both players who had I think Takuya Yamada was the only one that had over 100 appearances, but Luke Mulholland was definitely, I think he's in the argument for, one of the greatest Rowdies of the modern era.
I agree.
He's just showed an incredible class, and we kind of launched his career here with the Tampa Bay Rowdies.
Yeah.
So I think it was an honor for him to be with us, and he has rapidly become a fantastic midfielder in his own right. And here come all my other roommates running around that side. So yeah, so really just big names. Yamada, again, in the 100 appearances club, has his own plaque over there. I mean, these are guys that are the Rowdies, right, James?
Yeah. I really wanted Luke Mulholland to actually come back to the Rowdies this past year. As you said, he launched his career here. He moved on to Real Salt Lake in MLS. and he made well over 100 appearances for them. Actually, that's how well it went for him. But in this past year, he left RSL, and I was under the impression that there's an outside chance that he might come back down here and play for the Rowdies again. And if he's not going to be in MLS, maybe he's lost a step, let's say. And the USL Championship would be a great place for him to come and play. Unfortunately, though, he retired, and now he has moved into the scouting world for RSL. So that is not to our benefit, but best wishes obviously to Luke Mulholland in his career doing what I think a lot of people would love to do is scouting. That seems like a pretty fun job. But that will be the midfielders and the attackers. Now that unit included Matt Clare, Dan Antoniuk, Mike Ambersley, Fafa Picol, and Carl Cox. So any of those names stand out for you immediately, Carlos? I know that there are one or two that have, this or that kind of connection elsewhere that is actually the first thing that I think of for, when I hear those names.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think Mike Ambersley is a name I've heard a couple times, and he had a good era with us. I think he scored I think it was just under 20 goals from my brief research I've done on him. Fafa Picol is a name I've heard a lot as well. Really, really good player.
Yeah.
Who I think this was his only season with us. I'm doing a little bit of Wikipedia on the side over here. Yeah, this was his only season with us before he moved on to the Strikers. Had some time in Europe as well. If I remember right, my little bit that I do recall of this team in my early research, I feel like he was one of the players that had just a ton of potential. And was a player that was really seen as having a really, really high ceiling. So it's really cool, I think, for him to start with us, and I think launch his career into Europe, which did not last super long for him. I think he's one of those players that had that really high ceiling, but maybe never reached it. But that being said, obviously, was here with us for a season. It played somewhat of a role, I guess, in that title run. As for the other guys, James, you're gonna have to educate me a little bit more because I've heard names. I know very little about said names, though.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. And I don't know the most about these guys, like I would say, compare to, I would compare them to, this or that player for the current Rowdies. I'm not sure that I would be super great at that. But Fafa Picol, I do know from a lot of the time that he's played in MLS because he has actually bounced around a lot of clubs there. So, he's certainly a talented player, and I'm sure that the other guys could stand in their own right at that time as well. Really quickly, want to shout out the ownership group led by Andrew Nestor at the time. If that is a name that people are unfamiliar with, he's just kind of part of the group that got this team started again. And I think that at least for that much, we owe him, the gratitude there. I think that there were other ownership groups that followed, like David Laxer. And then now we have continued along one or two more sales down the road to the Tampa Bay Rays. So, all of those things are important to keep in mind. And that ownership group entrusted former Rowdy Ricky Hill to lead the team from 2011 to 2014. He was part of the original Rowdies and then obviously coached us. So not too bad, all of that history to keep in mind as we move forward.
Yeah, lots of connections between that old era Rowdies and the new era Rowdies, obviously. Tons of players who've stuck around, who've stayed involved, whether coaching roles, front office roles. I think Perry Vanderbeck is, I don't think he has a formal role in the club anymore, but recently he is in the front office and he's still around the team. And I see him at church every Sunday when I'm back home. So shout out to him. But yeah, really cool that Ricky Hill was that guy, OG Rowdy that came back and helped lead this team to an eventual title. I think it would be really cool to have a chat with some of like the 2009, 2010, 2011 ownerships, because that experience of restarting a team must have been both really, really challenging and really, really exciting. Because I can only imagine all the challenges that come, like we talked about earlier, all like the paperwork and bureaucracy of having to navigate, what you're going to call the team while you figure out how to buy the Rowdies name and where you're going to play and then why you're playing at a Yankee spring training ground. All that must have just been a total mess. They did about as well as they can. So I think they all definitely deserve a shout out for that.
And shout out to Perry Vanderbeck, another person that we interviewed last year during the off season. So, I love Perry. I've known Perry for a while through my dad, but he's a very nice guy. I'm sure, obviously, he was one among many. But we'll do a quick ad break here and just say liking and subscribing, of course, is free, and we do appreciate when you do that. But if you think you might need some new threads this year, you can head on over to shop.rblrsports.com and check out all the designs that we've got going on there. There will be a promo code that you can use, COYR, for 10% off. So please do check it out. We love when you do that because I'm pretty sure, if you go, you will find something that you like. And I know that I have as well. Please do check it out. And we will get back now to our show. So, Carlos, let's get into the season, the 2012 season, and actually go through how that went for us. Like I said, the season before, we made it to the playoffs, got knocked out in the first round there. Yep. Very unfortunate. So they wanted to rebuild the team with the roster that we've just gone through. Overall, 8 teams took part in the 2012 season. Those were the Puerto Rico Islanders, a team that I really wish would be represented again because I'd love to see Puerto Rico have a soccer representation somewhere.
I agree.
Carolina Railhawks, now North Carolina FC in the USL League One. Atlanta Silverbacks, who are now defunct, unfortunately. Fort Lauderdale Strikers, who are also now defunct, which I will say is unfortunate, even though they were our, in-state rivals at the time, the local team that we had a history with. If you want to go back to the old NASL, it is unfortunate that we don't have that rivalry because I don't think that the Miami is. I don't think it's the same, Carlos. I got to say that's probably a lower level.
I would agree with you. It is fun to call them the Miami FC, though. I think that's a pretty cool thing that the Fort Lauderdale Strikers did not have. But yeah, it's sad. We could do a whole 3 episodes about the state of soccer in South Florida.
Yeah, let's save that for another day, though. We'll do that in another off season.
Yeah.
The other teams were the Minnesota Stars, now Minnesota United in MLS. It is the same ownership group. San Antonio Scorpions, who are not the same ownership group as San Antonio FC in the USL Championship, but actually their stadium was just taken over by the new ownership group for San Antonio. FC Edmonton, who joined the Canadian Premier League, and unfortunately they are also now defunct. I believe the Canadian Premier League is looking to replace them in Edmonton, but that team is no longer around. Yeah. Now, let's go through the season itself a little bit more. The standings ended with San Antonio on top, and the Rowdies finished in second place. So actually a better place finish than the season before. This meant that we were automatically entered into the season semifinals, while teams 3 through 6 all had to play in quarterfinals.
Yeah.
In those, over the course of the season, it should be noted the Rowdies only lost 7 games. That's how we got into our position. That was out of 28 played all season. And our toughest stretch was kind of May through June. I don't know if we're kind of noticing a pattern there, Carlos, but, these hotter months with a lot of games piled up on top of each other, that does tend to turn out pretty rough for us. But I feel like it's also generally down to fixture congestion because there's always a point during the season where there are just too many games and, the team can't kind of handle it.
Yeah, it doesn't matter who you have on your team. It's always going to be – fatigue will always be a factor when there's that many games, It's interesting because the NASL at this time was 8 teams, so you'd think they'd be able to spread it out a bit more. There's not a ton of teams, so you have to squeeze everybody in there.
No.
But there's still, even then, the fact that summer portion came around and was a little bit of a tough stretch. History repeats itself, and you can only imagine now, looking, ahead 11 years later in a league with 30 plus teams. I think I'm wrong. Around 30 teams. I forget how many teams are in the USL Championship right now. It's a lot of teams to squeeze a game in with, especially now with the Western Conference having to have a game against every team in the Western Conference at least once. All your conference opponents. It gets even tougher. So history will repeat itself, and I'm sure that'll be a story we see once again around the same time frame. But yeah. That being said, it's so many teams here. By the way, I just want to mention that. I just wish we could see again, like the Puerto Rico Islanders. I think it's worth mentioning again. Having a team in Puerto Rico was just so much fun. I remember in one of those early seasons I was around for the Rowdies. I think it was 2016. We played Puerto Rico FC at the time at home. Wrapped by those bright orange jerseys, and they had fans that came over and they were playing, like Puerto Rican music and cooking up food out there. And I was like, this is awesome. Like this is soccer. And then that game, Joe Cole scored a bicycle kick against Puerto Rico, and that was awesome too. So great memories associated with Puerto Rico soccer against the Rowdies. It's crazy that there's only 8 teams, and out of those 8 teams, 6 teams made the playoffs.
Yeah.
That is a wild statistic, and it feels like you had to be really bad not to make those playoffs.
It feels like it's just so early days of soccer, and you think about like the timing of it. We had the old NASL, we had MLS start up again in '96, and then there were a couple of lower division teams. The Rowdies didn't join the USL Championship until 2016, 2017, something like that. So it's just crazy to think about all of the different iterations of leagues that there have been in America. And I mean, if you go through it now, I guess there's still NISA here, but I feel like NISA doesn't even like themselves.
Yeah, soccer has always been weird in this country, especially in this time frame. We say it was kind of like in its early stages, and it is only 11 years ago. It's very crazy how far this sport has advanced in that short time frame.
Yeah.
Just structurally, competitively, et cetera, et cetera. If I recall correctly, I think our first season as FC Tampa Bay wasn't even in the NASL. I think we had like one season where we were playing in like USSF Division 2 or whatever it was called. And I think that was the early stages of what we now know as USL, if I'm not mistaken. I have to go back and double check that. But I know for a fact we weren't in the NASL that first season. So just this weirdly bouncing around and trying to put a league together before, like in the preseason, so you have enough teams to field the league. Like it was a mess. And somehow, the Tampa Bay Rowdies in their first season being known as the Tampa Bay Rowdies put together a really, really good team to compete in this, very shoddily built league, right?
Yeah, it's the old soccer wars that we unfortunately have to deal with here. But with all of that being said, we did build a good team, and we were able to actually compete this year in a way that we had not previously. So if we get to the playoffs, like I said, we had made the semifinals already, and in the quarterfinals, the team that we would be up against, Carolina Railhawks, beat Fort Lauderdale 3-1 in Cary, North Carolina. That set them up on their semifinal, which was against us, of course. The 2 semifinal legs were over. Yeah, it was over the course of 2 legs. The Rowdies won the first one 2-1 and drew the second 3-3. So with that being said, we were through to the final after having 2 local lads score against us in those games against the Railhawks. Tampa native Nick Zimmerman and Clearwater native Brian Shriver. So I'm pretty sure Brian Shriver did play for the Rowdies. I don't believe Nick Zimmerman ever did, but it's just interesting how many Tampa people from around this time frame were playing everywhere outside of the Tampa Bay Rowdies team. I know that we mentioned earlier we had JP Rodriguez, who is from Lutz, and we had a couple of other players who represented the Rowdies over the years, like Darnell King from Tampa, like Ben Sweat from Palm Harbor. But yeah, Nick Zimmerman was here, and Brian Shriver. There was also Jeremy Hall, who played in MLS, and he's from Tampa. It's just interesting that there were so many players that the Rowdies ultimately could not bring in. I feel like it would be best to keep the local people local, but it's also hard to do that when you're on a fixed budget, I'm sure.
Yeah. No, I'm sure in this time frame of just getting a team restarted, it was more about surviving.
Exactly.
Than anything else. This era of soccer. As we can see very clearly, just looking at the names we've mentioned who played the league earlier. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4 teams, 4 out of 8 teams that are defunct now. If that's the case, like you can imagine that they were worried about fielding a team and trying to turn some sort of profit.
Exactly.
And who knows why all those Bay Area guys ended up in different places. But I'm sure it comes down to money and survival, like everything else right now, or like everything else at that time.
Yeah, contracts were very important for everybody on both sides of them because you didn't know whether the team was going to be around. I'm sure half the time. Anyway, yeah, that's another thing to think about when we're going through this old soccer story from the Tampa Bay area. Now, the final was also over 2 legs, and the first leg was actually a 2-0 loss up in Blaine, Minnesota, in front of 4,642 fans. So, not obviously the best start for us. Now, the second leg was down in the Tampa Bay area at Al Lang Stadium, like I said. It ended tied in regulation. So how did that break down? It was 2-0 coming into this game, and the Rowdies scored 2. I believe their second one coming around the 52nd minute. Right after that, Minnesota scored again. So if you're keeping track on the aggregate, that would make it 3-2. Right before the end, though, the Rowdies tied it up again, so they made it 3-3 on aggregate and ultimately took us through the extra time period until penalties, where we had to go through and try and find a hero there. But Shane Hill was also sent off before that that extra time period started. So we ultimately played 11v10 for those last 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And we still kept the score 3-3, luckily, overall. And yeah, it was definitely a very difficult job. I was, looking back at the highlights from back then, just so that we could make sure we were fully prepared for this, Carlos. And it seemed like we were hanging on by the skin of our teeth a couple of times there.
Yeah, no, when I go back and watch that, it's always something that I know the fact that you held on for the entirety of that extra period with 10 men is just so insane and just incredibly gritty, incredibly impressive. I think that's the word that summarized this 2012 team more than anything is just gritty, right? It's a team that went out there and just fought for every possession, fought for every ball. And the fact that they held out in the final, under the pressure, under the lights, with 10 men taking it to penalties, is just like unspeakably impressive. That means every single player is defending, putting it all out there on the field. It's not just the defenders, it's the forwards coming back and the attacking midfielders and the wingers coming back and playing as defenders for that whole period. And if I'm not mistaken, there was at least one chance where they could have won it in overtime, even with 10 men. But the fact that they held out a draw and the fact that they came in down 2-0 and equalized, even with Minnesota scoring a goal here, or not here, but down in Al Lang, just insane resilience, insane heart.
Yeah.
It's just very characteristic of what this 2012 team and the stars and the legends that made up this team, really what it was all about.
Very never say die kind of attitude here.
Yeah.
But that took us into penalties, Carlos, and this is where we actually came through. So the penalties went Neil Hlavati, who went for Minnesota Stars. He scored his. Then Luke Mulholland stepped up, and he also scored his penalty. Devin Deldo for Minnesota, with a name that we will skip over entirely, he had his saved by goalkeeper Jeff Attinella. So very good start there. We have ourselves a little window that we could break through, and we did just that. Raphael Cox stepped up, and he scored his penalty to give us a 2-1 lead. Then Kyle Altman stepped up for Minnesota Stars, and he had his saved as well. So ultimately, we are here 2-2, have a huge window, and Fafa Picol steps up and scores his goal. Makes it 3-1. Not that bad. Simone Bracalello for Minnesota steps up, and he scores his. It's 3-2. Then Carl Court steps up for the Rowdies, and he misses, unfortunately. That leaves it still at 3-2. Lucas Rodriguez is the final player to step up for Minnesota Stars, and he also has his penalty saved. So, with all of that being said, Jeff Attinella saved 3 penalties in that shootout. That way, the Rowdies ended up winning it 3-2, and we did get that second star in front of 6,208 fans. I mean, Carlos, that is an incredibly impressive thing to do, like, just because it's a penalty shootout. We go back to the World Cup final where Dibu Martinez did that against France, and you have the mind games that you have to get into to try and, psych somebody out, or the mind games that you have to try and get into to figure out what somebody's going to do. It's crazy that you can, like, I can't put myself there mentally. I was never a goalkeeper. I wasn't that much of poop talker, let's say, on the field. I don't know, everything that it takes to go in as a goalkeeper and try and win something like that. Like, if you're the person who goes up and take the penalties, I don't think that that's anywhere near as difficult. You have, according to statistics, a 3 in 4 chance of scoring it. So, not that bad. Goalkeepers are living on that 25% that you miss. It's unfathomable for me to like have to go through that and be in that position where everything is on your shoulders.
And to save 3, right? It's not even like if you save 1 in a penalty shootout, it's huge. Like when you save 1 penalty, it gets the stadium riled up.
Yes, it does.
I would say like in big games like this, you hear a louder reaction when there's a save than when there's a goal. Like it's usually not even close. It's like when there's a save made, the fans scream even louder than a penalty goal during the shootout because it means that much more. And for Adenella to do that repeatedly was just, I mean, he's a legend in the Rowdies canon and the Rowdies lore for a reason. And I think this 15-minute penalty shootout was kind of where he stamped his name into the Rowdies history books forever. It's just incredible stuff. And that's not to mention, of course, I know I don't want to discount how hard it is to actually score a penalty with so much pressure on you, with the lights on you and the fans all quiet, waiting for you to put the ball in the net. All those guys that scored as well deserve huge props and shout outs. But it's just different when your goalie does that much in the penalty shootout. It's just, you can't be any more of a hero than how much Jeff Adenella was on that night.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just so crazy to think about. And I reach back for it again. It's not, a direct comparison, obviously. The NASL championship is not anywhere near the World Cup, but, it still reminds me of when Argentina beat France. And you have to be able to not only keep yourself in a place mentally where you're focused enough that you can, dive down and do the things that you need to do physically from one side to the other, and actually try and get your hands in the way of one of these strikes, which is going as fast as they can hit it for the most part. But if you can get into their head a little bit and psych them out and make them worry that they're going to miss, there are so many facets of it. I hate penalties. Like, I don't think it's a great way to win or to lose a game, but if you do ultimately win on penalties, then you're going to celebrate just like you had won any other way. And Jeff Adenella certainly deserved it, and as much as anybody else did along the way. With that win, the season was concluded, obviously, and the awards were handed out. Coach of the Year went to Ricky Hill, so congratulations to him. Now, several years down the line, but I think that obviously it was well-deserved for him to have taken the Rowdies not only one step better from one year to the next, but to have obviously taken them all the way through to the end and won the game. I think that, if you win the league overall, you will most likely win the Coach of the Year, but it's probably deserved based on the results of it all. The best 11 for the season also included a couple of Rowdies players. Jeff Adenella, that player that we have just been mentioning over and over, he was considered the goalkeeper of the year. I think that's also fair. You go into a penalty shootout in the final and you win it, you should probably get that award. That's definitely fair. Takuya Yamada and Luke Mulholland, both players that we have already spoken about a lot, were also on the NASL Best 11 for the 2012 season. And that wraps it up for the season overall. But Carlos, any other closing thoughts that you have for our 2012 recap?
No, this was pretty fun, James. I love doing this, going back and just kind of recapping, I guess, trying to put myself in those shoes. I know we have some listeners who were definitely at this game. So I would love to hear what their thoughts were, some of their memories, pictures, videos, fun self-fies. I don't know that you have.
Yeah, if you've got stuff, send it in.
Yeah. I'm sure when Eureka puts out this tweet, about this episode, I would love to see everybody's memories and just whatever you have from this game in the comments or in the whole season, really. If you're at a game this season, it'd be really cool to see what you have to say, what the experience was like for you, maybe what that championship game was like. It's just, it really is. Again, I'm not trying to make you feel old, James. It wasn't that long ago, but it still feels like it was a totally different club.
Oh no, it feels
Totally,
ages ago.
yeah, a totally different culture. Like, it's just a totally different situation. So for anybody at this game, I mean, I think the championship atmosphere and the stadium setup and everything was just had to be totally different from this game versus our championship game against Orange County a couple seasons ago.
Yeah.
Even just attendance wise, right? What was it? 6,208 was the reported attendance for that championship game. That's an attendance that you hope to see at like a pretty big Saturday regular season game.
Yeah,
Today,
that's
right?
it. That's right.
And I don't have the number on me from that championship game against Orange County, but I can only imagine how close that number was or how high that number was, because if you were there, I mean, that was shoulder to shoulder across the whole stadium. I think 20 minutes into the game, there's still a huge wave of people on the ground floor waiting to get up into the main stand. And it was already shoulder to shoulder in the supporter section everywhere else. So it's just, I mean, there's a lot of different stuff going on in 2012 in this championship season, this championship game. We talked about what a weird era this was for U.S. soccer and for Tampa Bay soccer, and Tampa Bay FC, which was playing its first season as the Rowdies. It's really, really cool. So I would just love to see what everybody has to say. If you were at this game, any memories you have to share would just be really, really cool for me personally to see. I'm sure James would appreciate it as well.
You are damn right. I would love to see them. So, Carlos, if you could please take us into our first extra time segment piece. We have, I guess, the news of, there's nothing else to cover now for the 2012 season. We might as well just spill the beans on who we're having over.
Yeah, I think we might as well just keep going with this theme, right? Speaking of Jeff Attinella, pretty random name. I don't know. I've never heard of it. We have an interview with penalty shootout hero Jeff Attinella next week. That's pretty fun, James. It's not to make this whole episode sound like an advertisement for next week's interview, but I mean, that is pretty cool that we're going to have, again, one of the Rowdies canon pieces, one of the lore legends of this club. He's ingrained into this club's history, into this club's culture, into the attitude and the grit of this team even today. I think it's all characterized by Jeff Attinella. Just a fantastic man, fantastic person, a guy who just still loves this team and is still around.
Oh yeah,
Tampa Bay sports as a whole, not just the Rowdies. So it's gonna be lovely to chat with him, and I'm sure everybody will enjoy the conversation we're gonna have with a really, really good guy, really lovable personality, and again, more than anything, a legend of this Tampa Bay Rowdies team.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to speaking to him. I haven't had a chance to do that in a capacity either as our interviewer or just walking around. I've seen him around, but I haven't had a chance to say hi and hey, you're Jeff Attinella, oh my god, all that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
I guess I'll have to get all of that out of the way before we actually get started, right?
Yeah, that's gonna have to happen, or else I'm gonna be fanboying over StreamYard.com here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that's just not professional of me, so I'm gonna have to reel it in a little bit, go full interviewer mode. But yeah, for me personally, just really, really exciting. Again, Jeff Attinella is a name I just associate with the Rowdies. I mean, there's a few names I associate as Tampa Bay Rowdies, just through and through. Jeff Attinella, Georgie Hristov, Luke Mulholland, Yamada, in more recent times, Guanzati, and Fernandez. I mean, these are guys that make up this team, but I think you're kind of OG of the new era has to be Jeff Attinella. So just really, really exciting. And I'm sure everybody's going to enjoy that conversation live.
Absolutely. Like I said, I know I will too.
Yeah.
There is one other thing that I wanted to shout out in our extra time segment. There's not a lot to go over currently with the Rowdies, but One cool thing, the Canadian Premier League that I mentioned earlier, they actually have their own podcast that is going on right now. They're doing a Black History Month series, so I would recommend that. A former player, Jordan Wilson, is interviewing several of the Canadian Premier League's black players. One of those is Andrew Jean-Baptiste, who grew up in the New York area. And on their rapid fire segment, he said, what are the best players you've ever played with? Who are the best players you've ever played with? And he named two players, one of whom was Leo Fernandez. So they're kind of random, but I just wanted to shout that out because I looked them up and I don't know when they would have played each other. I'm almost certain it had to be. They're roughly the same age, and their careers didn't line up anywhere else, so it had to be youth level. They had to play each other at the youth level, and I'm assuming that's where. But apparently, Leo Fernandez made such an impression on this guy Andrew Jean-Baptiste that he is one of his best players that he's ever played against. But just a cool little thing that I wanted to shout out.
That's really cool. That's really cool. To tie that back to the modern Rowdies, I think just to close out our chat here tonight, James, I just want to, I know we've been talking about this 2012 team, but talking about this championship run just gets me so excited for what I hope is a championship run this season. We've been getting close. We've been chipping away at some of the, I forget who it was. I want to say it was, how was one of our new signings? A couple of them mentioned how close we've been to a title and how they want to be the ones that push us over that line.
Well, I know Forrest Lasso definitely said that.
Yeah, I mean, it was several of them. I'm trying to think of the one I was thinking in particular. That being said, I mean, I think it was Felix Schroeder, actually, was somebody who mentioned it explicitly as well. He wants to be competing for a title and he wants to be at a team that's close and wants to push them over the line. I'm sure I think Cal Jennings said something similar about how he wants to personally win the Golden Boot and push his team over the line, which, by the way, is a crazy lofty goal, and I really appreciate his, big goals individually. But it's so exciting to talk about this 2012 team because I do see that grit, that excitement, that energy, and that just really good quality all around the field with this team that we've built this offseason. I don't know. I mean, it feels like we're at a point now where there shouldn't be many, if not any other, surprises when it comes to signings and stuff. I guess we'll have to see. There were tryouts recently, so maybe somebody comes out of those tryouts. But as far as what this team's going to look like, I think we have a pretty good idea at this point. I guess it's all about how Neil Collins is going to structure it, what the lineup's going to look like, what that formation is going to look like. That being said, I think we just have a lot to look forward to this season. And if you haven't had a chance to go pass by that Waters Avenue complex one morning, I'd highly recommend checking it out. Tons of spots where you can just park and check out the Rowdies practice a little bit, see what's going on, see the excitement around, that complex. Those guys are just really, really excited to be there. And that's something you can just tell from even just looking from the outside. They're really excited, and I can't wait to get started this season, James.
Me too. I'm also getting excited for it. Well, Carlos, I think that will do it for us. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in this week. We obviously appreciate when you do every week, but if you have made it this far, then you know who we have coming up next week, and definitely do tune in for that. It's going to be awesome. Please follow us as well. We are at RBLR Sports on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. I am at RBLR James K on Twitter. What about you, Carlos?
Yeah, I'm at Carlos TPA10 on Twitter. Let me go check what I've been tweeting about. I think I just retweeted Dan Lucas's pictures from the new Waters complex.
Nice.
Speaking about that. Yeah, it's a nice little place. I think my last tweets were actually from when I was over there a few days ago. It's just a really, really cool spot they've built. Or I guess they didn't build that. It's been there, and they just kind of made it their own, adjusted it slightly. And it looks really, really great. And I think that's going to be a home for us to be at for a long time. Really, really cool place. So tweeting about the Rowdies, tweeting about Georgetown sports, Georgetown basketball, the Ecuadorian U20 team, which has been struggling, unfortunately, at the South American Championships, but it is what it is. Tons of stuff going on over on my Twitter. I don't know. If you like talking about random sports, come over and drop a follow.
There we go. Please like and subscribe to our podcast as well. We are on Spotify, the iHeartRadio app. We are on Apple and Google Podcasts. We are on YouTube and all other major podcast platforms. Now, to take it back to 2012, all the way when we won the championship and our second star. Come on, you Rowdies.
Thank you for tuning into this presentation by RBLR Sports. On your way out of the stadium, please remember to like and subscribe.